Her presence irritates me. I wish she would just disappear forever. Then I could finally breathe. Those were my husband's words. I heard every single one of them, standing right outside our kitchen door, grocery bags in my hands, heart slamming against my ribs. He was laughing when he said it. Laughing. After 11 years of marriage, 11 years of my life given to that man, I was just an irritation he wanted gone. So I disappeared, but not the way he expected. If this story speaks to you, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far my story travels. I remember the exact weight of those grocery bags. It's strange, the details your mind holds onto when everything else is falling apart. I had driven to the store after a 10-hour shift at the hospital, where I worked as an administrative coordinator. I had picked up the groceries because Trevor had texted me, and I quote, "Can you grab dinner stuff? I'm starving." No please, no thank you, just an order, the way he'd been speaking to me for years. Slow and steady, like water wearing down stone until you forget the stone was ever anything but smooth and small and easy to step on. I had bought his favorite pasta, the kind with the ridges he liked, because he said the sauce stuck better. I had bought the crusty bread from the bakery section, not the bagged stuff, because he always made a face at the bagged stuff. I had bought the good olive oil. I did all of that because that's what I did. I showed up. I took care of things. I made sure Trevor was comfortable, fed, happy. That was my job. That was my entire identity for 11 years. I pulled into the driveway and I noticed something immediately. The lights in the kitchen were on, and I could hear his voice. Loud, relaxed. That laugh he only ever used when he was completely at ease. I hadn't heard him laugh like that around me in a long time. I didn't even realize it until that moment, standing outside my own front door, how long it had been since my husband had laughed anywhere near me. I thought maybe he was on the phone with his brother Danny. They used to talk for hours. I pushed open the front door quietly, the way I always did when I came home late, out of habit, out of consideration, out of all those small courtesies I gave without thinking. And that's when I heard it. She's just always there, you know, like a piece of furniture I can't get rid of. Her presence irritates me, Candace. I wish she would just disappear forever. Then I could finally breathe. I stopped moving. I think my heart stopped moving too. He wasn't talking to Danny. He was on the phone with a woman named Candace, and he was talking about me. There was not a single doubt in my mind that he was talking about me. I was the furniture. I was the irritation. I was the thing standing between my husband and the air he wanted to breathe. And then he laughed again. Light, careless, relieved, like just saying the words out loud had lifted something off him. I stood in the hallway for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 30 seconds. The grocery bags were cutting into my palms. The good olive oil was in there, the pasta with the ridges, the crusty bread. I set the bags down on the hallway floor without making a sound, and I sat down on the bottom stair and I listened. No. She has no idea, he said. She never figures anything out until it's too late. That's always been her problem. She trusts too much. She thinks because she works hard and keeps everything together that nobody would ever do this to her. He paused, a soft laugh. She's wrong. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, not yet. From something colder than anger. Recognition. Because I knew, in that moment, sitting on the bottom stair of the house I had helped pay for, the house I had decorated and cleaned and filled with the small dignities of a shared life, that this was not new. This was not a sudden betrayal. This had been going on quietly, under the surface, maybe for years, and I had been too busy loving him to see it. I am 53 years old. I have spent more of my adult life with Trevor than without him. We met when I was 29, married when I was 32, and every year since then I had poured myself into us, into him. When he lost his job in 2015, I worked double shifts and never complained. When his mother got sick, I drove 4 hours every weekend to help care for her without being asked. When his business idea failed and he fell into a depression that lasted 8 months, I held him together with both hands, and I kept holding until he came back to himself. And now I was furniture, an irritation, something he wanted gone. I heard him say her name again, Candace, and something in his voice when he said it was soft in a way I hadn't heard him be soft in years. Years. That softness used to be mine. I used to be the person who made his voice go gentle like that. I picked up the grocery bags. I walked into the kitchen. Trevor was leaning against the counter, phone pressed to his ear. He saw me and something flashed across his face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at the interruption. And then he held up one finger, the universal signal for wait, as if I had walked in on something important, as if I were the interruption in my own home. "Hey, let me call you back," he said into the phone. His voice was casual, practiced. Yeah, I will. Okay." He hung up and looked at me. "You're home late." I set the grocery bags on the counter. I started unpacking them. Slowly, deliberately. The pasta with the ridges, the crusty bread, the good olive oil. "Who was that?" I asked. My voice came out calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. "Just a friend from work," he said. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling, done with the conversation before it had started. "Candace?" I said. He looked up. For just a second, 1/2 second, something moved behind his eyes, and then it was gone, replaced by that particular smooth blankness he used when he was managing me. I had seen that look 100 times. I just hadn't known what I was seeing. "Yeah," he said, "we work on the same project. Why?" "Just curious," I said. I kept unpacking. He kept scrolling. And in the silence between us, I felt something happen inside me, something shift, something settle, something that had been soft and uncertain crystallize into something hard and clear. It was not rage, it was not grief, though the grief was there underneath it, enormous and waiting. It was something else entirely. It was decision. I made dinner that night. We ate at the table. Trevor talked about a colleague who had gotten a promotion he didn't deserve, and I nodded in the right places, and I said, "That's frustrating," when it seemed like he wanted me to say something. And the whole time, the words were playing in the back of my head like a song you can't unhear. Her presence irritates me. I wish she would just disappear. Then I could finally breathe. I watched him eat the pasta with the ridges, and I thought, he doesn't know that I heard him. He doesn't know that everything has already changed. And I thought something else. I am going to let him keep not knowing. For now. Because the woman he described, the woman who trusts too much, who figures things out too late, who never sees it coming, that woman was going to disappear. But I was going to be the one who chose how. After dinner, Trevor went upstairs to watch TV in the bedroom, which had been his habit for the last 2 years. We hadn't watched TV together in 2 years, and I had been telling myself it was just a phase, just a rough patch, that long marriages went through valleys like this, and you stayed, and you waited, and it got better. I had been telling myself a lot of things. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and my phone, and I called my best friend, Marlene. Marlene and I have been friends since our late 20s. She had been through her own divorce from a man named Gerald, who had taken her for granted in ways that made Trevor look like a beginner. And she had come out the other side stronger than I had ever seen anyone come out of anything. Marlene was the person I trusted most in the world, more than my sister, more than my mother when she was still alive, more than Trevor had ever earned. The phone rang twice, and she picked up. "Hey, you," she said, warm and familiar. And then, because she knew me the way only a friend of 25 years can, what happened? I told her. I kept my voice low, measured, aware that Trevor was upstairs with the TV on, but that sound traveled in this house in unpredictable ways. I told her what I had heard, word for word, because I had the kind of memory that holds pain with perfect accuracy. I told her about Candace. I told her about the laugh. I told her about sitting on the bottom stair with the grocery bags cutting into my palms. When I finished, there was a silence on Marlene's end. Then she said, very quietly, "How long do you think it's been going on?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think longer than tonight." "What do you want to do?" That was the question. That was the only question that mattered. And I had already started to know the answer, there at the kitchen table, but hearing her ask it out loud made it real. "I want out," I said. "I want out completely. I want to do it right, I want to do it clean, and I want to do it in a way where he can't take anything else from me." Marlene didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe you should sleep on it," or any of the things people say when they think a woman is acting on emotion rather than clarity. She said, "Okay, then let's figure out how." We talked for 2 hours. By the end of the conversation, I had a list. It was not a grief list or an anger list. It was a practical, organized, step-by-step list, the kind I used to make for hospital budget meetings, the kind Trevor used to mock because he said I turned everything into a project. I remember him saying that once, laughing. "You'd plan a spontaneous vacation with a spreadsheet." He meant it as a criticism. He had always been vaguely dismissive of my organizational instincts, as if efficiency were a character flaw, as if being prepared were something to be embarrassed about. He never understood that my planning was not about control. It was about care. It was about making sure things didn't fall apart. It was the same impulse that had kept our household running, our finances stable, our lives orderly for 11 years, while he drifted and floundered and took credit for a stability I had quietly built and maintained. Well, that impulse was about to be redirected. The first thing on the list was a lawyer. I had a name already, Patricia Hale, who had handled Marlene's divorce and who Marlene described as the kind of woman who makes opposing counsel nervous walking into the room. I would call Patricia in the morning. The second thing was finances. I knew our financial situation intimately. I had always managed the household accounts, but I needed to understand exactly what was protected, what was joint, what I was entitled to. I needed to understand what the house was worth and what my rights were with regard to our shared assets. The third thing was finding a place to go. Not a hotel, not temporarily, a real place, an apartment, something I could sign a lease on, something that would be mine. I looked at that list for a long time after I hung up with Marlene. Then I heard Trevor's footsteps on the ceiling above me, moving from the bedroom toward the bathroom, the particular pattern of his walk I had been hearing for 11 years. And something rose in my chest that I didn't fully expect. Not anger, not hatred, something closer to grief, deep and complicated grief, for the man I had thought I was married to, for the life I had thought I was living, for all the small, ordinary moments I had been inhabiting without knowing they were built on sand. I grieved him, right there at the kitchen table in the dark, with my water glass and my phone and my list. I let myself feel it, the full weight of loving someone who had stopped loving you back, maybe slowly, maybe long ago, in ways you missed because you were too busy showing up. That grief was real. It deserved to be felt. But I didn't let it stop me. I wiped my eyes, folded the list, and put it in my purse. Then I went upstairs, changed into my pajamas, and got into bed next to my husband. He didn't stir. He was already half asleep, unbothered, comfortable, breathing easy. Her presence irritates me. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and I thought, you have no idea what's coming. You have absolutely no idea. And I thought about something else too, about the word disappear. He had used it like it was a fantasy, like it was something he wanted to gift himself, my absence, like I was the obstacle standing between him and his own happiness, like 11 years of my love and labor and loyalty could be wished away like smoke. I want you to understand something. I am not a dramatic woman. I am not the kind of person who makes scenes or issues ultimatums or thrives on conflict. I had spent most of my adult life being steady and reasonable and quietly capable. And I had genuinely believed, that those qualities would protect me, that a woman who worked hard and loved loyally and kept her promises would be safe in her own life. I was wrong about that, but I was not going to be wrong twice. Trevor rolled over in his sleep and his arm landed across my waist, the way it used to when we were younger, when things were different, when I thought I knew who he was. The weight of it was so familiar, it almost broke me. Almost. I lay there for another hour, still and quiet, while the plan in my head grew clearer and more detailed with every passing minute. I was already 3 steps ahead. I was already gone. He just didn't know it yet. And in a strange, cold, clarifying way, that was the most powerful I had felt in years. By 4 a.m, I had stopped crying. By 5, I had drafted a text to Patricia Hale's office asking for the earliest available appointment. By 6, Trevor's alarm went off and he got up and padded to the bathroom and started his day, completely unaware that the woman he had wished away was lying in his bed running calculations. "You're up early," he said when he came back in to get dressed. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "You should see a doctor about that." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was already selecting a tie. "I'll look into it," I said. He left for work at 7:15. I watched him back out of the driveway from the bedroom window, and I felt nothing. No longing, no second guessing, no part of me chasing after the version of him I used to love. Just clarity. Just the list. Just the next step. I called Patricia Hale at 8:01 when her office opened. Her receptionist answered on the second ring. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Diane Calloway, and I'd like to speak with Ms. Hale about beginning divorce proceedings. I'd like to move quickly. I'd also like to ensure that my husband has no advance warning." I paused. "Can she fit me in today?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "Let me check her schedule," the receptionist said. I stood at the window of the bedroom I had shared with Trevor for 9 years, and I waited. "Ms. Calloway? She has a cancellation at 10:30. Can you make that work?" "Yes," I said. "I can make that work." I hung up and looked around the room. At the dresser he had never bothered to organize, at the stack of books on my nightstand that he had never once asked me about, at the wedding photo on the wall, me in white, him in his gray suit, both of us laughing at something that had happened just off camera, some small moment of joy I couldn't even remember anymore. I thought about taking it down. I decided to leave it. I wanted everything to look exactly the same for as long as possible. Because the most powerful thing about disappearing, I was learning, was choosing the moment you let them see it. That moment had not come yet. But it was coming. And when it did, Trevor was going to understand something he had never understood about me. That the woman he had spent 11 years underestimating was the same woman who had been quietly, carefully, invisibly building the exact life he thought he owned. And she was about to take it with her. Patricia Hale was exactly what Marlene had promised. She was a small woman, maybe 60, with silver hair cut close and eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not moved by any of them. Not because she was cold, but because she had learned to save her energy for what actually mattered. She shook my hand when I walked in, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and said, simply, "Tell me what you need." Not, "Tell me what happened." Not, "How are you doing?" Tell me what you need. I liked her immediately. I told her everything. Not the emotional version, I had already given that to Marlene, but the factual version. The house, purchased jointly in 2019, valued currently at approximately $420,000 based on recent comparable sales in the neighborhood. The joint savings account with just over $68,000. My individual retirement account, Trevor's pension through his employer, the car that was in my name, the car that was in his, the way our finances were structured, who had contributed what, how many years I had been the primary earner while he built a business that never fully launched. Patricia listened without interrupting. She took notes on a legal pad with a pen, not a computer, and every few minutes she would look up and ask a question so precise it made me realize she had already understood 6 things I hadn't finished saying yet. "Have you accessed your joint accounts recently?" she asked. "I checked the balances this morning," I said. "Everything is as it should be." "Good. I want you to open a personal account today. Separate bank, not one you and your husband have any relationship with. And transfer your direct deposit there effective immediately. Do not touch the joint account. Don't withdraw from it. Don't add to it. Just let it sit. The last thing we want is for him to claim financial misconduct before we've even filed." I nodded. I was already writing it down. "I also want you to photograph every financial document in that house," she said. "Tax returns, investment statements, mortgage documents, anything with a number on it. Not because we'll need all of it, but because we want to make sure he can't make things disappear once he realizes what's happening." "He doesn't know yet," I said. She looked at me steadily. "How long do you want to keep it that way?" I thought about it. I thought about Trevor backing out of the driveway that morning, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror, going to an office where Candace also worked, completely certain that his wife was home, being an irritation, being furniture, being the presence he wished away. 3 weeks, I said. I want to be completely ready before he knows anything. I want to be out of the house. I want the papers filed. I want my finances separated. I don't want to have this conversation with him until there is nothing left for him to contest. Patricia nodded slowly. "That's aggressive, but it's doable. It means you're going to have to act fast and act quietly." "I'm good at both of those things," I said. She almost smiled. "I believe you." I left her office at noon with a folder of documents to gather, a list of steps in precise order, and the name of a real estate attorney she trusted for the property side of the proceedings. I sat in my car in the parking structure, and I did not cry. I made 3 phone calls instead. The first was to my bank. I opened a new personal checking account and arranged to redirect my direct deposit. The representative on the phone was friendly and efficient and had no idea she was helping me dismantle a life. The second call was to a real estate agent named Sandra, who came recommended by a coworker and who answered her phone on the first ring with an energy that told me she was the kind of person who made things happen. I explained the situation in broad strokes. Going through a divorce, need to understand timeline and process for listing a jointly owned property. She was professional, warm, and did not offer unsolicited opinions about my marriage. "I can pull comps and walk you through a realistic timeline," she said. "How soon do you want to meet?" "Tomorrow, if possible," I said. "I have a 9 a.m., she said. "Does that work?" "That works perfectly." The third call was to Marlene. "How did it go?" she said before I could speak. "Patricia is everything you said she was." "I told you." I could hear the relief in her voice, and underneath it, a careful anger she was holding on my behalf. Marlene had loved Trevor once, the way good friends love the partners of the people they love. Cautiously, conditionally, always with one eye on whether he was treating me right. She had stopped talking about him warmly about 2 years ago, and I had not registered it until now. How many things had I not registered? "Marlene," I said, "did you know, before last night, did you have a feeling?" A pause. A long one. "I didn't have proof," she said carefully, "but I want you to know that the way he talked about you when you weren't in the room, it changed. A while ago. It got quieter, colder, like you were a topic he was tired of." I absorbed that. It hurt in a specific way, the way the details always hurt more than the main event. Not just that he had stopped loving me, but that Marlene had seen it and hadn't known how to say it. That there had been a version of this conversation we should have had a year ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Because I didn't know if I was right," she said, "and because you were so sure of him. I didn't want to take that away from you until you had to lose it." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "I'm going to be okay." "I know you are," she said. "I've known that longer than you have." That night, I moved through the house differently. Trevor came home at 6:30, and I had made dinner again. Something simple, pasta, different kind from the night before, and we ate and he talked and I listened and I was perfect. I was the version of me he expected, attentive and unremarkable, present in the way furniture is present. And the entire time I was cataloging. I had started photographing documents that afternoon. Every folder in the filing cabinet in our home office, the one I had organized and maintained for 11 years, while Trevor used it maybe 4 times. Tax returns going back 7 years, the mortgage documents, his 401k statements, which arrived quarterly and which I always opened because Trevor never did, investment accounts, insurance policies. I was thorough. I was fast. I was done before he got home. After dinner, he went upstairs, and I sat at the kitchen table with my phone, and I looked up apartments. Not anywhere near our neighborhood. I wanted a clean break, a new zip code, a place where I would not run into him at the grocery store or bump into neighbors who knew us as a couple. I found 3 possibilities within 40 minutes. All of them were available within 2 to 3 weeks. One of them had a month-to-month option. I sent inquiries to all 3. By the time I went to bed, I had heard back from 2. Trevor was already asleep when I came upstairs, lying on his back, one arm thrown over his face, breathing deep and even, completely at peace. I stood in the doorway and I looked at him and I tried to find something, some last remnant of what I had felt for him, some reason to pull back from the edge of what I was building. I tried to be fair. I thought about the good years, the real ones, the early ones when he used to call me in the middle of the day for no reason, when he used to grab my hand in movie theaters, when he used to say my name like it meant something to him. I couldn't find it. Not because the memories weren't real, but because the man sleeping in that bed had made it impossible to stand in their warmth. He had replaced those memories with other ones, with furniture, with irritation, with Candace's name spoken in a voice that used to belong to me. I got into bed. I set my alarm for 5:30, and I slept better than I had in months. The meeting with Sandra the next morning changed things in a way I hadn't expected. I had prepared myself for a cautious, conservative estimate of the house's value and timeline. What Sandra told me instead was that we were sitting in one of the strongest sellers markets the area had seen in years, that houses in our neighborhood were going in under 2 weeks, and that ours, based on the square footage, the updates I had made to the kitchen 3 years ago, the backyard, was likely to move fast and move well. "What are we talking realistically?" I asked. She gave me a number. It was higher than I expected, significantly higher than the number I had given Patricia. I did math in my head without letting it show on my face. Even after paying off the remaining mortgage, even after splitting the equity 50-50, which was the baseline I was working from, though Patricia had already told me there was an argument for a larger share, given my documented financial contributions, I would walk away with enough to start over. Genuinely start over. Not scrape by, not survive, but actually begin again. "How quickly could we list?" I asked. Sandra looked at her notes. "If you're motivated, and it sounds like you are, I could have it on the market within 10 days, professionally staged, photographed, listed on a Thursday for maximum weekend traffic." 10 days. Trevor was planning a trip in 12 days. I had seen the calendar notification on his phone 2 nights ago when it lit up on the nightstand. A 5-day solo retreat he had mentioned casually, the kind of mention that was designed to sound spontaneous but felt planned. A trip that now, with everything I knew, I understood was not solo at all. 10 days works, I said. I called Patricia from the parking lot. She picked up on the second ring. "We have a timeline," I said. "I need to know. Can I list the house without his signature initially? Can I at least begin the process?" "Not without his knowledge once we've filed," she said. "But here's what we can do. I can file the divorce petition this week. Under our state's automatic temporary restraining orders, neither party can dispose of assets without court approval. But that doesn't prevent you from beginning the listing process. If he contests the sale, we go to the judge. Given the financial record you've brought me, I'm not worried about a judge's ruling." "File this week," I said. "File as soon as you can." There was a brief pause. Diane, once I file, he'll be served. He'll know. I know, I said. I just need a few more days to get settled first. Can you file Thursday? I can file Thursday, she said. Today was Tuesday. I had 48 hours. I went home and I was so steady, so ordinary, so exactly the woman Trevor expected me to be that I almost frightened myself. I answered his texts from work. I responded to his reminder about some dry cleaning. I confirmed, when he mentioned it over the phone at 5, that yes, I had seen on the calendar that he had that trip coming up, and yes, I thought it was fine. He should go. He deserved a break. He deserved a break. I said it without a tremor in my voice. You're in a good mood, he said, and he sounded briefly puzzled by it. The way you're puzzled when something you stopped expecting shows up anyway. I'm just tired, I said, but in a good way. I feel like things are about to get better. There was a short silence on his end. Yeah, he said finally. Me too. I bet he did. That night, after dinner, while Trevor watched television upstairs, I packed my first boxes. Not the obvious things. Not clothes, not furniture, nothing he would notice. I packed my books, my files, the small framed photographs of my mother and my sister that had always been on my side of the bedroom and that I had always loved and that Trevor had never once commented on in 11 years. I packed the things that were only ever mine, the things that had lived in this house the way a renter lives, quietly, not really belonging to the walls around them. I moved the boxes to my car. I drove them to a storage unit I had rented that afternoon, 2 miles away, cash payment for the first month. I came back home. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I listened to the house. Wednesday passed the same way, steady, careful. I was a woman who had learned to wait, and I was using every bit of that skill now. Trevor noticed nothing. Of course he didn't. He had not been looking at me for years. I could have been packing in the middle of the afternoon with all the lights on, and he would have walked past without seeing it. That was the saddest part, I think. Not the betrayal, not the cruelty of what he had said, but the sheer invisibility of it. That I had become so beneath his notice that I could disappear by degrees, and he would not register the subtraction until there was nothing left. Well, he was about to start registering. Wednesday evening, his phone rang at 8:15. He stepped out of the room to answer it, and I heard him move down the hallway, and I heard his voice drop to that low, easy register, and I knew. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. I already had everything I needed. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at my phone and I saw the confirmation email from the apartment I had chosen, a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor, available for move-in on the 15th. My move-in date was the 15th. Move-in date confirmed. I read that email 3 times. When Trevor came back to the living room, I was looking at my phone with the most neutral expression I had ever worn in my life. Work thing, he said, as if I had asked. I hadn't asked. Okay, I said. He sat down across from me and picked up the television remote, and I looked at him. Really looked at him. The way you look at something you're memorizing. The way you look at a place you're leaving. And I thought, I know exactly who you are now, and I am no longer afraid of that knowledge. I am no longer made small by it. I am going to take every single thing I built, everything I earned, every piece of this life that has my fingerprints on it, and I am going to walk out of here with it, and I am never coming back. And you are never going to see it coming. Thursday morning, I called Patricia at 8:45. File it, I said. Filing now, she said. Trevor would be served within 24 to 72 hours. The clock had started. I had one last act of precision left before the silence broke. I went to work that day, sat through 3 meetings, answered 47 emails, and on my lunch break, I signed the lease on my new apartment. I transferred the first month's rent and security deposit from my new personal account. I confirmed with Sandra that we were on track to photograph the house on Monday, with Trevor's trip beginning Tuesday morning. The timing was not an accident. I had planned it down to the hour. When I came home Thursday evening, Trevor was standing in the kitchen with his phone in his hand and an expression on his face I had never seen before. a look of total, uncomprehending disruption, like a man who has just reached for something that has always been there and found only air. He looked up when I walked in. "Did you know about this?" he said. His voice was strange, stripped of its usual ease. He turned the phone toward me. On the screen was a notification about a legal document. His name. My name. The word petition. I set my bag down. I looked at the phone. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. The silence that followed was the longest and the cleanest silence I had ever lived in. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at me like he was seeing something that didn't make sense, something that violated the laws of the world he had built in his head, the world where I was furniture, where I was predictable, where I figured things out too late and trusted too much and never saw anything coming. "Diane," he said. Just my name, nothing else. And I felt it then, not satisfaction exactly, but something like it. Something like the moment you put down a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it at all. "I heard you," I said quietly, 2 nights ago, in the kitchen. I heard everything you said to her. His face changed. Everything in it changed. And I thought, there it is. There's the moment you realize the furniture was listening the whole time. The way Trevor looked at me in that moment, I will carry it for the rest of my life. Not because it hurt me, but because it was the first time in years that he was actually seeing me. Not the version of me he had decided I was, the predictable, trusting furniture version, but me. The woman who had spent 48 hours quietly and methodically dismantling his entire assumption of how this would go. The look on his face was not guilt, not yet. It was shock. Pure, unfiltered shock. The shock of a man who has been caught not just cheating, but being wrong. Wrong about who he was dealing with. Wrong about what I was capable of. Wrong about every calculation he had made. "You heard me," he repeated. It wasn't a question. It was a man repeating words back to himself, trying to understand where the ground had gone. "Every word," I said. I was standing in the hallway with the groceries. "The pasta you like. The crusty bread. The good olive oil." I said it evenly, not to punish him, but because I needed him to understand the specific texture of what he had done. Not some abstract betrayal, but a concrete one, happening while I was buying his favorite food, trying to take care of a man who was on the phone wishing me gone. He put the phone down on the counter. He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized, the one he made when he was overwhelmed, when the world was demanding something from him he wasn't prepared to give. I had seen it when his mother was sick. I had seen it when the business failed. Every time Trevor was confronted with something he couldn't manage, his hands went to his hair. And every time, I had been the person who stepped in and managed it for him. Not this time. "Diane, listen to me," he started. "I am listening," I said. "I've been listening for a long time. That's actually been the problem." It wasn't what it sounded like. I looked at him, just looked at him. And something in my silence must have told him how that sentence landed, because he stopped, and he had the decency to look, briefly, like he knew how hollow it was. "Her presence irritates me," I said. "I wish she would just disappear forever. Then I could finally breathe." I kept my voice flat, not theatrical, not trembling, just the words, exactly as he had said them, returned to him intact. "Tell me what part of that I misunderstood." He didn't answer. He looked at the counter. "How long?" I said. Nothing. "Trevor, how long has it been going on with Candace?" He was quiet for so long that the silence itself became an answer. Not days, not weeks, something longer, something that had been living in this house alongside me while I drove 4 hours on weekends to take care of his mother and worked double shifts and bought the good olive oil and folded myself smaller and smaller to fit into a marriage that had already moved on without me. 8 months, he said finally. 8 months. I didn't react. I had braced for it. I had told myself to brace for it. But 8 months is a long time to be the last person in your own life to know the truth. And even braced, I felt the number land somewhere deep and quiet. 8 months, I said. Diane, I never meant for you to find out this way. How did you mean for me to find out? He opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer, because there was no answer. He had not planned for me to find out at all. That was the truth of it. He had planned to keep going. The trip next week, the late phone calls, the carefully maintained pretense of a marriage. And I would have kept pouring myself into something that had been empty for the better part of a year. I need you to understand something, he said, and his voice changed, softened, took on that particular tone I had once found irresistible, the one that said, I'm being real with you. This is the honest version of me. I recognized it now for what it was, a tool, a way of managing me. Things between us have been bad for a long time. You know that. We both know that. I know that now, I said, because you said it out loud to someone else. What I didn't know was that your solution was to start something with a coworker instead of talking to me. I tried to talk to you. When? My voice sharpened for the first time. Give me one specific conversation, Trevor. One. Where you came to me and said our marriage is struggling and I'm unhappy and I need something to change. One conversation. He was quiet. You can't, I said, because it didn't happen. You didn't fight for this. You just opted out, quietly, and kept living in the house I kept running and eating the food I kept cooking and cashing the paychecks that paid for the life you were building with someone else. You're making this sound, I'm making it sound exactly like what it is. He was quiet again, and in the quiet, something shifted in him. The managing tone fell away, and what replaced it was something raw, something I wasn't sure I trusted. A vulnerability that might have been real or might have been the next tool in the box. What do you want from me right now? He asked. Nothing, I said. I don't want anything from you. I have a lawyer. I have a plan. I have a place to go. What I want is for you to understand that this is real and it's already in motion and there's nothing to negotiate. He stared at me. You have a place to go, he repeated slowly. You already have a place. I signed the lease this afternoon. Another long silence. I watched him process it, the timeline, the speed of it, the fact that while he had been going to work and texting Candace and planning his trip, I had been 3 steps ahead of him every single day. I watched the moment he understood that the woman he thought he knew, the woman who trusted too much and figured things out too late, had known for almost 72 hours and had spent every minute of it moving. How long have you been planning this? He asked, and his voice had gone quiet. Not soft, quiet. The way things go quiet before they break. Since the night I heard you, I said. 2 days. He laughed, an involuntary laugh, short and stunned, not amused. The laugh of someone who has just realized the scale of what they misread. 2 days, he said. I told you I was good at planning, I said. He sat down on one of the kitchen chairs. He sat down heavily, the way people sit when their legs have decided before their mind has. He put his elbows on the table and he held his head in his hands, and for a moment he looked like a man in genuine pain. And I watched him and I felt, I want to be honest about this, I felt a flicker of something. Not softness exactly, but recognition. Because I knew what it felt like to have the floor disappear. I had been living in that feeling for 72 hours. And even with all my planning, there had been moments in the dark when the grief had cracked open and the air had gone out of the room. I didn't say any of that, because my grief had been about losing a marriage I thought was real. His grief, whatever it was about losing control of a situation he had created. Those are not the same thing. The trip, he said, suddenly looking up. Next week, you know about the trip. I assumed it wasn't solo, I said. He had the grace not to lie about it. He just looked away. She can have you, I said. She is welcome to all of it. The late calls, the managed silences, the way you talk about the person you're supposed to love when you think they can't hear you. She can have every bit of that. I'm done. I picked up my bag. I told him I was going to stay at Marlene's that night, that there was food in the refrigerator, and that Patricia's office would be in touch with his attorney. I walked out of that kitchen with my heart slamming, but my steps steady, and I did not look back. Marlene opened her door before I had finished knocking. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside and said, "Tell me." I told her. Everything. The conversation, Trevor's face, the 8 months, the way his voice had changed, all of it. She listened the way only she could, completely still, completely present. And when I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said very carefully, 8 months. 8 months, I confirmed. She made a sound in the back of her throat that was not a word. Then, "You okay?" "I'm better than I should be," I said. "Is that wrong?" "No," she said firmly. "That means you already know you did the right thing." I stayed at Marlene's that night. I slept in her guest room, in the quiet of a house that didn't have Trevor's weight in it, didn't have his breathing or his habits or his absence that had somehow become louder than his presence. I slept 7 hours straight, and when I woke up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like myself. The next morning, Trevor called 4 times before 9 a.m. I let every call go to voicemail. At 9:15, I listened to the messages. The first was stunned, halting. He needed to talk to me. Could I please call him back? This didn't have to be this way. The second was more urgent. There were things I didn't understand about the situation, about what had been going on. He needed the chance to explain. The third, and this was the one that told me everything, was quieter, more calculated. He had clearly had time to think. He started talking about the house, about the finances, about how if I would just slow down, we could handle this reasonably, like adults, without lawyers getting involved and making everything complicated and expensive. There it was, the moment he shifted from emotional to tactical, the moment he remembered that there was money at stake and that I had access to information he would have preferred I didn't. The fourth message, left at 8:58, was just, "Diane, please." I deleted all 4 and called Patricia. "He's left messages," I told her. "He's starting to think about the money." "They always do," she said without particular surprise. "Don't speak to him about finances. Not one word. Anything he wants to discuss about the marital assets goes through me." "What about the house? He's going to push back on listing it." "Let him try," Patricia said. "I'm looking at the financial documentation you sent me. Your contributions to this marriage are extraordinarily well documented, Diane. His attorney is going to take one look at this and advise him to settle fairly and quickly. Fighting it out benefits no one, and his position is not strong." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Okay. I need you to do one more thing today," she said. "I need you to go to the house when he's at work, and I need you to make sure your personal documents, passport, social security card, anything irreplaceable, are in your possession. People in his position sometimes make irrational decisions when they feel cornered." She was right. I drove back to the house at 10 when I knew Trevor would be at the office. The house was quiet and felt different, already less mine, already in the process of becoming just a property, just an asset to be divided. I moved through it quickly, my documents from the file cabinet, a small box of my mother's jewelry that had been in the bedroom closet, several items that were mine before the marriage, clearly documented as such. I was in and out in under 40 minutes. As I was pulling out of the driveway, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I read it at the first red light, and I went completely still. It said, "This is Candace. I think we need to talk. Please don't ignore this. There are things about Trevor you don't know, things I need to tell you before this goes further." I stared at that message for a long time. Candace, the woman he had been laughing with on the phone, the woman he had spoken to in that voice that used to be mine, reaching out to me directly, asking for a conversation, claiming there were things I didn't know. My first instinct was clean and simple. Ignore it. Delete it. This was not someone I owed a conversation, and whatever she wanted to tell me was almost certainly designed to benefit herself, not me. Maybe she wanted to gauge how angry I was. Maybe Trevor had sent her, hoping she could soften me, slow me down, buy him time. But there are things about Trevor you don't know. I had been wrong about him once already in the direction of too much trust. I did not want to be wrong again in the direction of too little information. If there was something relevant, something about finances, about the marriage, about anything that could affect what was coming, I needed to know it. I called Marlene. Candace texted me, I said. Silence. Then, "You're joking." She says there are things about Trevor I don't know. She wants to talk. Diane, Marlene's voice was careful. That could be anything. That could be a manipulation. That could be Trevor trying to... I know, I said. I know all of that. But if there's something I'm missing, I need to know before we're in front of a judge. You're going to meet her? I thought about it for another 10 seconds. I'm going to call her, not meet her, call. And I'm going to listen and say nothing. And I'm going to decide from there. Marlene exhaled. Be careful. I'm always careful, I said. That's what Trevor never understood about me. I called the number back from my car, parked in the lot of a coffee shop, engine running. It rang twice. Diane? Her voice was not what I expected. I had constructed a version of Candace in my mind. Younger, bolder, uncomplicated. But the voice on the phone was careful, nervous even, and tired in a way that surprised me. You wanted to talk, I said. Thank you for calling back. I wasn't sure you would. A breath. I'm not going to apologize over the phone. I'll apologize in person if you ever want that. What I need to tell you is, Trevor didn't just start this 8 months ago. I kept my voice neutral. What do you mean? I mean that 8 months ago is when I found out about me. But I'm not the first. There was someone before me. Her name is Renata. She worked at his previous company. They were together for over a year, and he ended it when she started asking for more commitment. She paused. He told me about her like it was just a story, like it wasn't relevant. That's when I started to understand what I was dealing with. The coffee shop's neon sign hummed in my peripheral vision. I said nothing. I'm not telling you this to hurt you more, Candace said. I'm telling you because I think you deserve the full picture, and because... Her voice shifted, something tightening in it. Because he told me last week that you were nothing, that you had contributed nothing to the marriage, that everything was his, that you would walk away with almost nothing. Her voice dropped. And I know that's not true. And I don't want to be the reason a woman who spent 11 years building something walks away empty-handed because her husband lied about what she was worth. I sat in my car. I didn't speak for a long time. Candace, I said finally, would you be willing to put what you just told me in writing? Another silence, longer than mine. Yes, she said quietly, I would. I hung up and I sat there, and I let the full weight of it move through me. Not just the betrayal deepening, not just the extra year added to the timeline of being deceived, but something else, something unexpected. The fact that the woman I had every reason to despise had just handed me exactly what I needed, had chosen honesty over self-protection, had looked at the situation and decided that what was right mattered more than what was easy. I called Patricia immediately. I need you to hear what just happened, I said, and I told her every word. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, get me her contact information. I want a written statement before the weekend. And Diane, her voice carried something that might, in a less composed woman, have been excitement. This changes things significantly. If Trevor misrepresented the financial contributions of this marriage to a third party, and we can document a pattern of deception, we are no longer talking about 50-50. I closed my eyes. I had walked into this wanting to get out clean, wanting to leave with my dignity and enough to start over. I had not walked in expecting the truth to keep expanding, layer by layer, each one revealing more of what I had been living inside without knowing. A year with Renata, 8 months with Candace, and through all of it, I had been buying the crusty bread. I had been driving to his mother's house. I had been holding the whole thing together while he used my steadiness as cover for a life he was building somewhere else. By the time I drove to Marlene's that evening to tell her everything, the grief had done something I hadn't expected. It had finished. Not the pain. The pain would take time, I knew that. But the grieving, the part that reached backward, the part that asked why and how and for how long. That part was done. Because now I had the full picture. Not a partial truth I could talk myself around, not a version I could make charitable. The whole thing, fully revealed. And the full picture, as devastating as it was also completely clarifying. I was not losing a marriage. I was being released from a fiction. Everything I had believed this life to be had been built on Trevor's willingness to let me believe it, while he lived something entirely different. The grief, once it had the full shape of what it was grieving, could actually finish, could actually let go. Marlene handed me a glass of wine when I walked in. She looked at my face and she said, "What happened now?" I told her about Renata. She set down her own glass very slowly. "That son of a—" "I know," I said. "Diane, a year before Candace." "I know. So for 2 years, at minimum." "Marlena," I put my hand on hers. "I know. I have it documented. Patricia has it. It's going to matter when it needs to matter." I looked at my friend, this woman who had seen me through everything, who had held her fear for me quietly and loyally for years without knowing how to say it. "I'm okay." She studied me. "You really are, aren't you?" "I'm going to be better than okay," I said. "I'm going to be someone completely different on the other side of this, someone I actually like." She squeezed my hand. "I already like her," she said. That night I lay awake, not from grief, not from anger, but from something that felt dangerously close to anticipation, the kind you feel before something begins, not after something ends. As if the story of my life, which I had been reading as one long continuous chapter, had just turned a page I didn't know was there. And on the other side of it was not the ending, but the opening of something I hadn't been given yet, something that was going to be entirely, uncomplicatedly, unapologetically mine. Monday morning, Sandra photographed the house. Tuesday morning, Trevor left for his trip, and I moved out of the only home I had known for 9 years with the kind of precision and quiet that comes from a woman who has finally, completely made up her mind. The note I left on the kitchen counter said exactly what I had planned it to say. 7 words. No explanation, no anger, no apology. You wished for this. I granted it. I closed the door behind me for the last time, and I walked to my car, and I drove to my new apartment, and I stood in the middle of my own living room, my own, no one else's, bought with the first month's rent from my own account with my own money. And I breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in 8 months, maybe longer, nobody's comfort was my responsibility. Nobody's feelings were mine to manage. Nobody was going to come downstairs and treat me like a piece of furniture they wished would disappear. I had disappeared, and I had never felt more present in my life. Trevor came home from his trip on a Saturday. I know this because Marlene told me. She had driven past the house that morning. Not in any dramatic way, just in the way a good friend checks on things without being asked. And she called me at 11 to say his car was back in the driveway and there were lights on inside. I thanked her and I went back to unpacking the last of my kitchen boxes, and I felt exactly nothing. Not dread, not satisfaction, not the old reflex of wondering what he needed or how he was or whether I should do something. Just nothing. The clean, spacious nothing of a woman who has finished a chapter and turned the page. What I did not expect was the phone call at 2 that afternoon. Not from Trevor. I was prepared for Trevor. I had my responses to Trevor lined up like tools on a workbench. Calm, brief, refer everything to Patricia, do not engage emotionally. What I was not prepared for was the number on my screen, which was not Trevor's, but was a number I recognized anyway. It was Danny, Trevor's brother. The person Trevor used to call for hours, the easy laugh I had sometimes mistaken for my husband's in other rooms of the house. I answered because Danny had never been cruel to me. In 11 years of marriage, through all the family dinners and holidays and awkward moments that come with marrying into someone else's family, Danny had always been decent, quiet, unassuming, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and asked real questions about your life and listened to the answers. "Diane," he said. His voice was low, careful. "I'm sorry to call. I didn't know if I should." "It's okay, Danny," I said. "What's going on?" A pause. I heard him exhale. "Trevor called me from the road this morning. He's not doing well, Diane. I'm not calling to talk you out of anything. I want you to know that. I know this is your decision, and I think—" He stopped, started again. "I think you probably had reasons I don't fully know about." "I did," I said simply. "He told me about Candace." Another pause. "He told me it had been going on for a while." 8 months, I said. That he admitted to. Silence on Danny's end. Long enough that I knew he was absorbing something he hadn't fully known. "He didn't tell me everything," he said finally, and I heard in his voice something that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it, the particular frustration of someone who loves a person and has spent years making excuses for them and has just hit the limit of what they can excuse. "Danny," I said, "I don't want you to be caught in the middle of this. That's not fair to you." "I'm not in the middle," he said firmly. "I want you to know that. I'm not calling to negotiate for him or soften you up or whatever he might be hoping. He doesn't even know I'm calling. I'm calling because you were part of this family for 11 years, and you deserved better than this, and I needed to say that to you directly." His voice went rough at the edges. "I'm sorry, Diane. I'm genuinely sorry." I had not cried since the night I sat at the kitchen table and let the grief move through me before folding it away. I had been deliberate, focused, forward-moving. But Danny's voice, with its simple, unasked-for decency, cracked something open that I hadn't known was still sealed. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "You're going to be okay," he said. "You're the strongest person in that marriage, and you always were." He just never appreciated what that meant. We said goodbye, and I sat on my new couch in my new apartment, and I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. Not for Trevor, not for the marriage, but for Danny, and for all the ordinary kindnesses of a shared life, the good parts, the real parts, the parts that had nothing to do with betrayal, that I was also walking away from. Because divorce doesn't just end a marriage. It ends a whole architecture of belonging, and some of the pieces that fall are ones you actually wanted to keep. Then I washed my face and I called Patricia. The house had received its first offer on Sunday, 4 days on the market. Sandra texted me while I was still processing Danny's call, and the number she sent made me read it 3 times to be sure I was reading it correctly. It was not just a strong offer. It was over-asking. A young couple, pre-approved, wanting to close in 30 days. "This is exceptional," Sandra said when I called her back. "The kitchen renovation you did in 2021 is doing a lot of work here. They loved it. The kitchen renovation I had planned, budgeted, supervised, and largely paid for myself, while Trevor complained that the timing was inconvenient. The kitchen he had eaten in every night for 3 years, without once remarking on what it had taken to build it." "Do we accept?" Sandra asked. "We accept," I said. The complication, and there is always a complication, came 2 hours later when Patricia called to tell me that Trevor had contacted her office through his attorney, and that his position, as communicated through said attorney, was that he did not agree to the listing of the house and would be seeking an injunction to halt the sale pending further negotiation of the divorce terms. I sat with that for a moment. Can he do that? "He can try," Patricia said, and her voice had an edge to it that I recognized from our first meeting, the edge of a woman who has been underestimated before and found it useful. His attorney filed the motion this morning. I will be responding by end of business today. Diane, I want you to hear me clearly. His position is not strong. The automatic temporary restraining orders work both ways. He cannot dispose of assets, but neither can he unilaterally block a sale that is in both parties' interests, particularly when the alternative is allowing the property to sit and depreciate. We have your financial records showing your contributions. We have Candace's written statement. And we now have something else. She paused for effect, and I knew Patricia well enough by now to know that her pauses were never accidental. "What else?" I said. "I requested Trevor's financial records as part of standard discovery. His attorney complied this morning. They had to, there was no grounds to object. And buried in 3 years of bank statements is a pattern of transfers to a joint account I had no record of." She paused again. "A joint account with Candace's name on it." The room went very quiet. "He was putting money into a joint account with her," I said, "starting 14 months ago. Small amounts at first. In the last 6 months, significantly larger ones. Consistent pattern transfers that any financial analyst would characterize as the deliberate repositioning of marital assets." Her voice was precise and completely steady. "He wasn't just having an affair, Diane. He was financially preparing to leave you while still living in the marital home and benefiting from your income and contributions." I think I had known, somewhere underneath everything, that there would be more. That a man who had lied about one thing for this long had probably lied about other things. That the picture would keep expanding. But knowing something is possible and hearing it confirmed as fact are two entirely different experiences. "How much?" I asked. She told me. It was not a devastating number in isolation, but it was money that had moved out of our shared life and into a future he was building with someone else, while I was buying groceries and driving to his mother's house and believing, with the sincere and terrible loyalty of a woman who kept her promises, that we were building something together. "Patricia," I said, and my voice had gone very quiet, "what does this mean for the settlement?" "It means," she said carefully, "that we are no longer discussing 50-50. It means we are discussing compensation for the deliberate dissipation of marital assets. It means his attorney called me 20 minutes ago and asked, very politely, very carefully, whether we would be open to an expedited settlement conference." She let that land. "They want this to go away quietly, Diane. They know what this looks like, and they don't want it in front of a judge." I stood in the middle of my new apartment holding the phone, and I thought about Trevor's face on Thursday night when I told him I had heard everything. I thought about the way he had said my name, just my name, stripped of everything else. I thought about the grocery bags in my hands and the pasta with the ridges, and the decade of my life that had been conducted in perfect good faith, while he conducted an entirely different one alongside it. "Tell them we're open to a settlement conference," I said, "on our terms. Our timeline. And Patricia, don't go easy." "I never do," she said. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following Wednesday. In the 5 days between that phone call and the conference, Trevor tried to reach me 4 times. I know this because my phone recorded the attempts, and I did not answer any of them. I was not being cruel. I was not playing a game. I simply had nothing to say to him that was not already being said through Patricia. And I had learned, finally, firmly learned, that Trevor's voice had a particular effect on me that I could not entirely control, a reflex of the 11 years I had spent being moved by what he said. And I did not trust myself to maintain the clarity I needed if I let him talk directly into my ear. On the 4th attempt, he left a voicemail. I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen, drinking my coffee. "Diane." His voice was different than it had been on those first messages. The calculation was gone. The strategy was gone. What was left was something I hadn't heard from him in years, something unguarded, almost unrecognizable because of how long it had been absent. "I know you're not going to call me back. I know you don't have to. I need to say something, and I need you to hear it even if you never respond to it." He stopped, breathed. "I ruined the best thing I ever had. I knew what you were. I knew what you gave, and I chose to treat it like it was nothing because it was easy and because you never made me feel the cost of it, and that's on me. The cost was always there. I just made you carry it alone." Another silence. "I'm sorry, Diane. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it's too late. I needed to say it out loud to you, even if you never—" His voice broke, briefly, cleanly, the way things break when they have held too long. "Even if you never hear it." I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand. I replayed it once, just once. Not because I was weakening. I was not weakening. I want to be absolutely clear about that. But because there are moments in a life that you owe yourself the full experience of. That apology was real. I believed it was real. Trevor, whatever he was, whatever he had done, was not a man without the capacity for truth. He was a man who had exercised that capacity too rarely and too late. But the apology was real. I deleted the voicemail. And I felt, in deleting it, not triumph and not cruelty, but a kind of ceremony, a closing, a door that had been ajar for 11 years, finally swinging shut on its own weight. I called Marlena. "He apologized," I said. "A real one. Voicemail." She was quiet. Then, "How do you feel?" "Sad," I said honestly, and completely sure. "That's exactly right," she said. "That's exactly how it should feel." The settlement conference lasted 4 hours. I sat across the table from Trevor for the first time since the night in the kitchen. He looked thinner, tired, like a man who had not been sleeping. And I looked at him the way you look at a place you used to live that has now become unfamiliar. Not with hatred, not with longing, with the particular detachment of someone who has already moved on to the next place. His attorney was competent and measured and made a reasonable opening offer. Patricia rejected it in 3 sentences. Trevor's attorney made a second offer. Patricia rejected it in 2 sentences. Then Patricia put the financial documentation on the table, the transfers, the joint account, the 14 months of repositioned marital assets. And Trevor's attorney stopped making offers and started making concessions. Trevor looked at the documents. He looked at his attorney. He did not look at me. By the end of the 4 hours, we had the framework of a settlement. The house sale would proceed. The injunction was withdrawn. The equity split would reflect my documented financial contributions and the dissipated assets. The retirement accounts would be divided in a manner that Patricia described afterward as highly favorable. The whole thing would be finalized within 60 days. As we were gathering to leave, Trevor's attorney stepped out to take a call. And for 90 seconds, Trevor and I were alone in the conference room for the first time. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Did you get my message?" "Yes," I said. "Okay," he said. He nodded slowly, like that was enough, like he hadn't expected more. "Trevor," I stopped. I thought about whether to say what I was about to say. I decided it deserved to be said because it was true, and because I had spent enough time in this marriage saying less than I meant. "I loved you for a very long time. That was real. I want you to know I don't regret that. I chose the words carefully. I needed someone who could see me, and you stopped seeing me. Maybe you never fully did." He was quiet. His jaw worked. "I know," he said finally. "I know you know," I said. "That's the sad part." His attorney came back in. I picked up my bag and I walked out, and I did not feel the need to say anything else. Everything had been said. Everything that mattered had already been decided, in the hallway with the grocery bags, in the quiet of the kitchen table at 4 a.m, in every calculated, precise step I had taken since the moment I heard my own husband wish me away. The next weeks moved differently than the weeks before them. Before, time had been urgent, compressed, full of deadlines and logistics, and the constant management of details. Now, gradually, things began to settle. The house sold and closed on schedule. The settlement was drafted and reviewed and signed. 61 days after I stood in that hallway, I was legally, completely, irrevocably free. I celebrated by doing nothing special. I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and Marlene across from me on the other end of the couch, and I thought, this is my living room. This is my furniture. This is my life, and I am nobody's irritation in it. But freedom, real freedom, the kind that lives in your bones, not just in your documents, takes longer than 61 days to arrive. I knew that. I had known it would. And in the weeks following the finalization, I began to encounter the less dramatic, less cinematic, more honest work of rebuilding a self that had been organized around another person for so long that some of its own preferences had gone quiet. I had to relearn things, simple things, what I actually wanted for dinner when no one else's preference mattered, what I did with a Saturday afternoon when it belonged entirely to me, whether I preferred the television on or off in the evenings, because Trevor had always kept it on and I had adjusted without noticing that I had. I discovered I preferred it off. I discovered I liked quiet in a way I hadn't given myself permission to admit, that I liked waking up without someone else's schedule imposing itself on my morning, that I liked the particular freedom of a Tuesday night with no obligations, no one to check in with, no emotional weather to monitor and respond to. There was loneliness, too. I want to be honest about that, because anything less would be a lie, and I had spent enough of this story being honest to stop now. There were nights in those first weeks when the apartment was too quiet, when the aloneness pressed in close, when I reached for the familiar weight of even a difficult companionship and found only air. Those nights were real, and they were hard, and I let them be what they were without trying to make them into something more manageable. But I also noticed something about those lonely nights. They were mine. The loneliness was clean. It was the loneliness of a person who is genuinely alone, not the loneliness of a person who is sitting across the dinner table from someone who wishes they were someone else. I'd been living with the second kind for years without knowing it had a name. The first kind, the honest kind, that I could work with, that I could move through. I started writing again. I had kept a journal in my 20s, before Trevor, before the marriage absorbed all available space. I had given it up so gradually I hadn't registered the loss. Now, in the quiet evenings of my new life, I started again. Not a journal exactly, more like letters. Letters to the version of myself who had been standing in that hallway with the grocery bags. Letters to the woman who had sat on the bottom stair and decided in the space of 30 seconds that she was not going to let someone else's cruelty write the ending of her story. I wrote to her every night, and she wrote back in the only way she could, by showing up in the mirror every morning looking a little more like herself. It was during this period that my coworker James, who ran the communications department 2 floors above mine, knocked on my office door one afternoon and asked if I would be willing to look at something he was working on. He was writing a proposal for an internal newsletter, and he had heard from someone, somewhere in the particular grapevine of a mid-sized organization, that I had a background in writing. I hadn't told anyone at work about the journal. I hadn't told anyone about the letters. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. He looked a little embarrassed. "Honestly, someone mentioned you were really good with words. I hope that's not weird." It wasn't weird. It was something else. A small, unexpected door opening in a wall I hadn't known was there. "Show me what you have," I said. That was how it started. Not with a grand revelation, not with a dramatic turning point, but with an ordinary knock on a door and a man who needed help with words and a woman who had been quietly finding her voice again and was ready, for the first time in a very long time, to use it. His name was James. He was 56, recently widowed, not divorced, widowed. A different kind of loss, a different kind of rebuilding. And he had the particular quality of someone who has been through enough to have stopped performing. He said what he meant. He listened when you spoke. When I fixed his proposal and handed it back to him, he read it carefully, looked up, and said, "This is significantly better. How did you do that?" "I paid attention to what you were actually trying to say," I told him, and then I said it. He smiled. "That sounds simple." "It's not," I said. "Most people never get there." He came back the following week with something else he was working on, and the week after that. And somewhere in those weeks of ordinary professional proximity, of conversations that began with work and gradually expanded past it, I realized something was happening that I had not planned for and had not been looking for and did not entirely know what to do with. I told Marlene. "His name is James," I said. "He works upstairs. He's kind, he's smart, he lost his wife 2 years ago, and he looks at me like I'm someone worth looking at." Marlene set down her coffee cup very deliberately. "How does that feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Terrifying," I said, "and not terrible." She laughed, a real one, the full-body laugh I had been hearing from this woman for 25 years. "Diane," she said, "that is the healthiest thing you have said to me in a decade." I laughed too, and the laugh surprised me, not the fact of it, but the ease of it, the way it came from somewhere genuine, somewhere that had not been accessible for a long time, somewhere that was coming back. I was not ready to date James or anyone. I knew that. I had 61 days of freedom and a drawer full of letters to myself and a self that was still in the process of reassembling. I was not going to rush it, and I was not going to pretend I was further along than I was. But I was also not going to close the door, because one of the many things I had learned in the past 2 months was this: the woman who closed doors, who shrunk herself, who kept her preferences quiet and her needs small and her voice below the level that might disturb anyone, that woman was gone. I had let her go the night I sat at the kitchen table and made the list. And what was replacing her, slowly, imperfectly, with all the uncertainty that real growth carries, was someone I was genuinely beginning to like. Someone who bought the good olive oil for herself now. Someone who had the quiet on in the evenings because she preferred it. Someone who wrote every night and was starting to think that maybe, the writing was not just for herself. Someone who looked at the word disappear and understood, finally, what it had actually meant. Not an ending, not an erasure. A transformation so complete that the person who emerged from it was unrecognizable to the people who had underestimated her. I had disappeared, and I had never been more visible to myself. The book started as a letter. That is the honest version of how it happened. Not a dramatic revelation, not a sudden burst of inspiration, but a slow accumulation of the letters I had been writing to myself every night in that quiet apartment, each one a little more honest than the last, each one reaching a little further back into the parts of my life I had been too busy surviving to examine. One night, I sat down to write the usual letter, and what came out instead was the opening line of something else. Something that began in a hallway with grocery bags and ended, well, I didn't know yet where it ended. That was the point. I wrote for 3 hours that night without stopping. I wrote until my hand cramped and my coffee was cold, and the apartment had gone from evening to full dark without my noticing. And when I finally stopped and read what I had written, I sat very still for a long time. It was good. Not perfect, raw and uneven in places, overwritten in others, but the core of it was good in the way that only true things are good, the way that things ring when they come from somewhere real. I called Marlene the next morning. "I think I'm writing a book," I said. She didn't miss a beat. "I know you are," she said. "I've been waiting for you to figure that out." "You knew?" "Diane, you've been writing your whole life. You just kept giving the words to other people, budget reports, memos, grocery lists for a man who didn't deserve them." She paused. "Write the book." So I wrote the book. I wrote it in the mornings before work, in the evenings after, on weekends when the apartment was perfectly quiet and the only thing asking anything of me was the page. I wrote it the way I had done everything else in the past few months, with intention, with precision, with the particular focused energy of a woman who has stopped spending herself on things that don't deserve her. James noticed. He noticed in the way that attentive people notice things, not intrusively, not with commentary, but with a quiet awareness that communicated itself in small ways. He stopped by my office one Thursday morning with 2 cups of coffee and said, simply, "You look different lately." "Different how?" I asked. He considered it genuinely, the way he always considered things before speaking. "Like you're working on something that matters to you," he said. "Like you have a reason to hurry up and get through the day." I looked at him across my desk. This man who had come back week after week with words he needed help shaping, who had never once made me feel like a utility, who looked at me like I was a complete and interesting person rather than a function someone needed performed. I thought about what I had said to Trevor in the conference room. I needed someone who could see me, and you stopped seeing me. James saw me. I had been aware of it for weeks, and I had been careful about it, responsible about it, because I was still new to myself, and I knew better than to let that newness get tangled up in something I wasn't ready for. But standing there with the coffee and the honest observation and that quiet, steady presence of his, I felt the careful distance I had been maintaining flex slightly. Not collapse, just flex. "I'm writing a book," I said. The first time I had said it to anyone but Marlene. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who has just heard a thing confirmed that he had already suspected. "About what?" "About disappearing," I said, "and what you find when you do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd read that." "It's not done yet," I said. "Let me know when it is," he said. He left the coffee on my desk and walked back out, and I sat there for a moment before returning to my work, aware of something settling in my chest, something that felt less like a door opening and more like a window. Not an entrance, not yet, but light coming in from a direction I had stopped expecting. The call from Trevor came on a Tuesday, 4 months after the settlement was finalized. I had not heard from him since the conference room. Not directly. There had been communication through Patricia about minor logistical matters, a tax document that needed to be signed, a form related to the retirement account. But his voice, in my ear, directly, that had not happened since the voicemail I had deleted. I had not expected it to happen. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about the woman I was becoming. The one who didn't make decisions out of fear or avoidance, and I picked up. "Diane," he sounded tired. Not the tired of someone who hasn't slept, but the tired of someone who has been living with themselves for 4 months and is finding it more difficult than anticipated. "I know I shouldn't be calling, He stopped. "Is this okay? Can I have 2 minutes?" 2 minutes, I said. He exhaled. "I'm in therapy," he said. "I started 6 weeks ago. I know that's probably not interesting to you, and I'm not telling you because I want anything from you. I'm telling you because my therapist said I needed to say certain things out loud to the people I had wronged, and," his voice tightened, "you're at the top of that list." I didn't say anything. I let him have the space. "I've been thinking about something you said, in the conference room. You said you needed someone who could see you, and I stopped seeing you." He paused. My therapist asked me when I stopped. I thought it would be hard to answer. It wasn't. I know exactly when. It was the year the business failed, when you held everything together and I couldn't. I think I started resenting you for being stronger than me, and I didn't know how to say that, so I just quietly decided you were the problem instead of looking at myself. He said it with the deliberate precision of someone who has rehearsed it, not to perform, but because they needed to get it right. That was wrong. It was wrong, and it was cowardly, and you didn't deserve any of it. I sat with that. In the past 4 months, I had constructed my own understanding of what had happened, the narrative I needed in order to move forward, the version of the truth that allowed me to function. This was a different dimension of the same truth, one I hadn't had access to before. The resentment, the failure, the particular male pride that can't tolerate being outperformed by the woman it's supposed to be protecting. I hadn't known that part. It didn't excuse anything, but it made the shape of it clearer. And there was something in having the complete shape, that allowed a different kind of release. "Trevor," I said, "I hear you. I believe you." I kept my voice even, not cold, not warm, honest. "And I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. It was over the moment I walked out of that house, and it was right for it to be over. But," I stopped, chose the words, "I think the work you're doing will matter, not for me, for you, and maybe for whoever comes next." A silence. "There's no one next," he said quietly. "What happened with Candace?" A short, unhappy sound. "She ended it, about 6 weeks after everything fell apart." He paused. "Turns out what she felt for me was mostly about the fantasy. When the fantasy went away, and what was left was just a man who had blown up his life, that wasn't what she signed up for." I thought about Candace on the phone, her careful, nervous voice, the way she had said, "I don't want to be the reason a woman walks away empty-handed." A complicated person, a person who had made wrong choices and then, at a critical moment, had chosen something right. Life rarely gave you simple villains, and this story had not been an exception. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was, in the way you're sorry for any human being sitting in the consequences of their own bad choices. Not deeply, not personally, but sorry. "Don't be," he said. "I earned it." We said goodbye. I held the phone for a moment after he hung up, and then I put it down and I noticed something remarkable. The call had cost me nothing. No destabilization, no reopened wound, no backward pull. I had listened. I had spoken honestly, and I had come back to myself without effort. That, I thought, was what healed looked like. Not the absence of feeling. I had felt things during that call, real things, but the presence of ground. The certainty that no matter what was said, you knew where you were standing. I texted Marlene. "Trevor called. I'm fine. More than fine, actually. Tell you everything Sunday." She texted back 3 seconds later. "That's my girl." The book was finished in month 7. Not finished, not ready for anyone else's eyes, not polished, still rough in the places where the emotion ran fastest and the craft hadn't caught up yet. But the story had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when I read it from the first page to the last, I felt the thing a writer feels when something is true. That particular resonance, like a tuning fork that has found its note. I showed it to James first, before Marlene, before anyone. I printed it out, all 212 pages, and I put it in a manila envelope, and I brought it to work on a Monday, and I knocked on his office door, and I held it out to him, and I said, "You said you'd read it." He took it with both hands, he looked at it, then he looked at me. "How long do you need me to take with it?" "Take whatever time you need," I said. "Just be honest." He was. He brought it back 10 days later, and he sat across from me in my office, and he told me what worked and what didn't, with the kind of care and precision that told me he had read every page and taken it seriously and respected it enough to be truthful. He told me the middle section was the strongest thing he'd read in years. He told me the opening needed more tension. He told me the ending, the part I had been most uncertain about, was exactly right. "This should be published," he said simply. "This is the real thing, Diane." I want to tell you that I received that calmly, with the equanimity of a woman who had done the work and knew what she had made. The truth is, my eyes filled, and I had to look away for a moment and collect myself, because there are some forms of being seen that hit you below the armor, regardless of how thick you've made it. "Thank you," I said when I could. "Don't thank me," he said. "I just read it. You wrote it." We went for coffee that evening for the first time outside of work. Nothing dramatic, a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, 2 hours, the kind of conversation that starts with the book and gradually becomes something else, becomes 2 people learning each other with the particular attention of people who are not in a hurry and are not performing. He told me about his wife, Margaret. Her name was Margaret. She had died of cancer 2 years ago after 18 months of illness, and he talked about her without performance, with a grief that was clearly real and clearly no longer in charge of him, which told me he had done his own version of the work I had done. He asked me about the marriage, not intrusively, not fishing for drama, but with the simple directness of someone who had read 212 pages of the honest version and wanted to understand who I had been and who I was now. I was someone who gave everything, I said. And then I became someone who understood that giving everything to the wrong person is not a virtue. It's a decision, and you can make a different one. He nodded slowly. And now? Now I give to the right places, I said. I'm still learning what all of those are. He looked at me across the table. I think you're further along than you think, he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a beginning. Not exactly. Not yet. But it was something, an acknowledgement between two people who had been through enough to know what they were looking for and careful enough to take it slow. I drove home that evening with the windows down, which I had not done since I was in my 30s, and I thought, this is what it feels like to be in your own life, not managing someone else's, not making yourself smaller to fit a shape someone else drew. Your own life, moving at your own pace in a direction you chose. The manuscript went to a literary agent 8 months after the settlement was finalized. Marlene came over the night I sent it, and we opened a bottle of wine that was better than anything I had ever served at the house, on account of Trevor always preferring a brand I didn't particularly like. And we sat on my couch, in my apartment, in the life I had built with my own 2 hands, and we didn't talk about Trevor or the divorce or any of it. We talked about what was next. What is next? Marlene asked, genuinely curious. If the book does nothing, if the agent passes, if it goes nowhere, what is next? I write another one, I said immediately, without having to think. She smiled. And James? I smiled back. We're having dinner Friday, I said. A real one this time, with a reservation and everything. She raised her glass. I raised mine. The agent called on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after I submitted the manuscript. I was at my desk at work, halfway through a cup of coffee, answering emails, doing exactly the ordinary things that ordinary life is made of, and my phone rang with a New York area code, and I picked it up, and a woman named Elaine said, Ms. Calloway, I finished your manuscript last night. I read the last 100 pages in one sitting. I'd like to represent this book. I put down my coffee very carefully. You would, I said, not a question. Just the words, needing to be spoken aloud to be real. I think there are a lot of women who need this story, Elaine said. Women who have been furniture for too long. Women who need someone to show them what it looks like to choose yourself. You've written that book. I sat at my desk in the hospital where I had worked for 14 years, in the ordinary Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday rhythm of a life that had been reconstructed from the ground up, and I felt something rise in me that was not triumph, though there was triumph in it, and not relief, though there was relief, but something older and quieter and more essential, something that felt like arriving. Like the version of myself I had been moving toward since the night I sat on the bottom stair and decided not to be anyone's furniture, had finally, fully come home. There is one more thing I need to tell you. 6 months after the call from Elaine, after the book had sold and the publication date had been set and my life had rearranged itself around the reality of being a writer, not an aspiring one, not a someday one, but an actual one with a contract and a deadline and a story that was about to belong to anyone who needed it. I received a message through a mutual friend. It was from Renata, the woman whose name Candace had spoken on the phone, the woman who had come before me and after me in Trevor's pattern of taking women who gave too much and giving too little back. She had heard through some circuitous route that there was a book. She had heard what it was about, and she had written, simply, carefully, I think I needed to know that someone else's story ended the way yours did. Thank you for telling it. I read that message 3 times, and then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I cried, not from grief, not from pain, but from the specific and humbling understanding that the story you think is only yours almost never is. That what you survive, what you build, what you choose when you finally choose yourself, it travels. It reaches people you have never met in places you will never see, and it tells them, you are not alone. What was done to you was not your fault, and the other side of it is real. I wrote Renata back. I told her the other side was real. I told her I hoped she was building hers. I sent the message, and I looked up from my phone, and James was standing in the kitchen doorway of the apartment we had been sharing for 3 months, holding 2 cups of coffee, wearing the expression of a man who has found something he stopped expecting and is not taking it for granted for 1 single day. Good news, he said, nodding at my phone. Very good news, I said. He handed me the coffee. He sat down beside me. He did not ask what it was about, because he was the kind of man who understood that some things are yours to hold first before you share them, and he had never once tried to make me smaller than I was. I looked at him, and I thought about furniture, about irritations, about a woman in a hallway who had been wished away and had used that wish to build something so much better than the life she was leaving that the old life had become unrecognizable to her. About all the women like Renata, like Candace in her own complicated way, like Marlene before me, who had sat in the rubble of something they had loved and had to decide whether that was the end of the story or only the end of the chapter. It was never the end of the story. I know that now in a way I carry in my body, not just my mind. I know it the way I know my own name, the way I know the particular quiet I prefer in the evenings, the way I know exactly how I take my coffee, and who I am on a Wednesday morning, and what I am worth. Not in any financial sense, not the settlement number or the book advance, or any of the external measures people use when they want to assess a life, but in the only measure that actually holds anything, the one you arrive at when you stop letting someone else do the calculation. Trevor had wished me gone. I had granted the wish, and what I found on the other side of disappearing was not emptiness, not the void he had imagined my absence would create, not the absence he had wished for like a door swinging open onto nothing. What I found was myself, fully, finally, unambiguously myself. And that woman, the one who buys the good olive oil for herself, who keeps the quiet on in the evenings, who writes the truth and lets it travel, who sits beside a man who sees her and does not look away, that woman was worth every difficult, deliberate, painstaking step it took to find her. She always was.